Here, there is only the war. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Well, time now to say hello to my panel. Aisha Hazarika, who's a political commentator and former advisor to the Labour Party, and former US federal prosecutor Joe Moreno. Hello to both of you. Just such distressing images are coming out of Gaza today. And perhaps if I start with you, Joe, talk about Antony Blinken, US Secretary of State, who's been in Israel today and really trying to put the pressure on for these humanitarian pauses that everybody's talking about. But he hasn't got anywhere yet on that front, has he?
Well, Lucy, you can't watch those images and not feel just heartbroken about this. This is a horrible situation. The problem with this concept of a humanitarian pause, which I get the rationale, right? We want to try to recover the hostages and minimize civilian casualties. But it's basically a semantical version of the idea of a ceasefire. And that's putting Israel in an extremely dangerous position because IDF forces have now already worked their way into Gaza. Asking them to basically stop hostilities puts them in a very dangerous spot. Hamas has a long record of violating ceasefires. And so I don't think it's realistic at this point. And remember, Hamas can stop this anytime it wants.
Well, the idea is that these pauses are just a matter of hours to allow aid agencies to get more aid in and to the areas where it's needed. In terms of the difference between a real ceasefire and a pause is the length of time, isn't it? It's a short period.
I guess you could try that, but I don't know how mechanically feasible that truly is. And President Biden's own Defense Department has said it does not recommend any kind of a ceasefire. So again, I guess we could try some kind of short period, but I think it's, again, creating an extremely dangerous situation for Israel. And again, Hamas can stand down and lay down their arms and surrender anytime they want and stop this carnage. I don't think they will, unfortunately, but it's in their hands.
Isn't it, Joe? And I think we've seen the sort of attitude changing slightly, haven't we, over the course of the last few weeks, with starting off with we had Rishi Sunak here in the UK, but also, you know, offering this unequivocal support for Israel. But the issue is that the longer that these images play out on our TV screens every single night, that the more likely people are going to come under pressure, leaders are going to come under pressure from the people in their own countries to be seen to be doing more to push Israel to go for these pauses and to do more in terms of the humanitarian aid.
Well, the pause is a great idea. I think the problem is carrying it out and asking Hamas to actually honor it. I think there's very little chance that they would actually do that. And I think we have to remind ourselves, too, remember, Hamas's mission is the eradication of Israel. Israel's only response is to eradicate Hamas. There's really no good third option. And so while all of us, of course, want to minimize or stop the civilian casualties, Israel has to make that decision that if they don't remove Hamas now, they will just keep trying and conduct the same kinds of terrorist activities they did on October 7th. So it's a brutal decision that has to be made. But Israel's in a very, very difficult position now.
Is Hassan Nasrallah. He's the leader of Hezbollah who's been speaking today. He's a Shia cleric who has led the group since 1992, and he's played a key role in turning it into a political as well as military force. Now, he has close links with Iran and its supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, which date from 1981. In a speech watched by thousands at a Beirut rally, Hassan Nasrallah praised the Hamas attacks on Israel on the 7th of October, but said they were 100% Palestinian.
This is the first operation which has been a historic point and blessed point. This was a Palestinian decision, 100% and supported by the Palestinians 100%.
Hamas in Gaza has repeatedly urged its allies to join the fight. But Israel has warned of unimaginable consequences if Hezbollah joins the Israel-Gaza war. And the army says its forces are on very, very high alert at its border with Lebanon.
Joe, the reaction widely today has been that people were quite relieved, really, because the last time that Hezbollah spoke about this, obviously this is the first time the leader has spoken, but they were saying we are fully ready to get involved, and it did feel a little bit more imminent. But there was a sense that perhaps, although he's leaving all the options open, there did seem to be quite palpable relief after that speech.
Well, I mean, I don't take much of that speech to heart. I think that whether it's Hamas in Palestine or whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon, the fact is they're both trained by Iran and they're both funded by the Muslim Brotherhood in Qatar. And so I think the sooner that we, on the West, realize that this traces back to Iran and that's the source of this issue, that's what needs to be done. And Iran not only backed the October 7th terrorist attacks, but they have made attacks on U.S. service members now in Iraq and in Syria in the last few weeks. So again, I know we're sort of soft-pedaling our reaction to Iran because we've tried to engage them in recent years, but I think that that displays weakness. And I think Iran does not see engagement as a positive thing. They see it as a weakness. They see it as a way to sort of take advantage and assert themselves further. And, you know, we let our ballistic missile sanctions lapse a few weeks ago against Iran. So I think the sooner the Biden administration and our allies change course there, that's the only time we'll be able to actually attack the source of these problems.
There did seem to also be a sort of shout out to the proxy groups, didn't it, to say that you're almost sort of endorsing the attacks on US troops. How worrying was that?
Very worrying. And again, I mean, going back to when the U.S. was in Iraq, and we would have proxy groups attack service members in Iraq, and yet we only responded in Iraq itself. We would not go into the homeland of Iran. And we've respected that boundary for a very long time. And I'm not advocating regime change. I know that's not a popular position right now, but we do have to be realistic and not have this Pollyannish view that an Arab Spring is always around the corner, because it's likely not going to happen. And as long as we hold out that hope unrealistically and don't actually look at the hard facts in the Middle East, this is going to continue.
Yeah. We were just talking earlier about the US being so stretched in all different ways, in three fronts, really. I mean, it's used to it. The US is used to that, isn't it? I mean, and I suppose you could see it as a good time to shine.
Well, we're used to it. Unfortunately, our history in the last 2 decades is not spectacular. Obviously, we're going to do our best to support our allies, to try to spread peace in the Middle East, to try to support our allies throughout Europe and in different conflicts in Ukraine. But the U.S. has to recognize that the strain's on itself, too, both financial as well as there's definitely a cultural limit to how far Americans are willing to intervene in foreign policy. Like Michael said, we're very good about rallying around the flag when we are attacked. Americans are not as good when it comes to supporting our allies overseas if eventually it costs them money or takes their attention away. So I think the Biden administration will have its hands full on keeping people focused in support of Israel, in support of Ukraine, in support of what else has to be done, because we tend to have, unfortunately, a short attention span in these areas.
Trump has lost her appeals to avoid testifying in this case, so we are expecting to also have her on the stand next week on Wednesday.
OK, thank you very much, Neda Tawfik, for us there in New York. Thank you for now. Let's go bring in my panel again, Ayesha Hazarika and Joe Moreno. And Joe, I mean, the strange thing really is about whenever anything like this seems to happen to Donald Trump is that his supporters seem to be buoyed by it.
Well, Lucy, to be honest, this is a tough case to comment on because, on the one hand, as an American, I find that Donald Trump has engaged in tons of egregious behavior, largely nestled in those 4 criminal cases he's facing. But as a lawyer looking at this objectively, I'll give Eric Trump a couple of points there. One, the New York Attorney General did campaign on going after Donald Trump. So it's like following the person, not the crime. She is an elected Democrat. The judge in this case is an elected Democrat who declared before the trial even began that effectively Donald Trump was guilty. And the law that's being used does not require fraud, does not require intent to commit fraud, and does not require any damages on behalf of a victim. So it does seem like a stretch to seek to decimate the Trump organization when not a single bank or insurance company or individual lost a penny. Now, this is not to endorse bulking up someone's record. That's not correct. But this does seem really disproportionate, and it kind of does play into the idea that this seems like a political vendetta.
Well, they're calling it a political witch hunt, aren't they, the Trumps? And they were also saying today, you heard Eric Trump talking outside court saying that it's a charade, and it's the reason why people are moving out of New York State because of people like the Attorney General of New York. Are people moving out of the state?
I mean, honestly, I'm a former New Yorker. I moved out 15 years ago, and I've lived in outside of Washington, D.C. ever since. Look, it's a great state, but it's a very blue state. I mean, there's really not much Republican opposition these days. Democrats have controlled the state for the last decade or more. So I think if you tend to be a center-right or very conservative person, I think you might find the political atmosphere in New York not very hospitable anymore.
And Joe, in terms of President Biden, I was looking at a poll today from the Arab American Institute showing that support amongst Arab Americans has really gone down. It was 59% for Joe Biden. It was 59% in 2020, and it's just 17% now since October the 7th. But even before October the 7th, it was down to 35%. I mean, this is an issue around the world, isn't it, in terms of people's reactions to the actions on foreign policy?
Sure. Joe Biden is going to be in a tough position because right after these attacks on October 7th, he said all the right things. He absolutely said he's behind Israel 100%. I think he was completely firm. I think he was right on with respect to our support of Israel. But now, like to your point, he is losing support among the Muslim population on the left, and they are critical in terms of states like Michigan and Illinois, and right now they're saying they're not going to support him. And those are critical states for him to win as far as re-election next year. And so he will be definitely tugged in the direction of backing off his support of Israel. And I think it's going to be an interesting test whether he stays strong with his initial words of backing or whether he starts talking about things like ceasefires. And that's why this idea of a pause gets me nervous, because that seems like the first step toward backing off support of Israel. And I hope he resists those pulls and stands fast.